Located in Harris County, just outskirts of Georgia, in the United States, is a small and quiet rural town known as Ellerslie. Ellerslie is known to be a peaceful and serene environment. It was quite small, with a population of just over 3,000 people during the late 90s, and this is where everyone could easily identify and recognize each other. It was mostly a lovely town where people can comfortably raise their family, bring up their children, and do some fun outdoor activities like fishing, hunting, and hiking. However, in 1989, there would emerge some mysterious and spooky real-life events which would haunt and torment a family till this present day and change the course of their entire life. But before I get into this true life story, if you're a lover of unusually disturbing, dark and spooky content presented narratively, then you have come to the right channel, and you might consider subscribing, as I will be dropping daily to weekly video contents and creepier to ghostly real life events that has been encountered. Also, do turn on your post notifications so that you would always be on the loop whenever I drop a new video content, and then proceed to take the like button on a fun hike within the woods of Georgia. And with that said, let's get into today's story. In 1988, Andrew and Lisa Wyricks were young couples who wanted an affordable, quiet, safe and peaceful place to settle in. They wanted a place free from any sort of crime and violence. This was because they needed somewhere where they could raise a family. They searched around Georgia, and after a year later, which was on February 1989, they saw a house which was quite modest in the small town of Ellerslie, where they were happy with. It was a brick ranch with a spacious yard. The previous owner had literally abandoned the house. They bought the 3-bedroom brick house and moved in together after a few days with their little 3-year-old daughter, known as Heidi. Even though this house wasn't so big and grand, it was what they had hoped for, and this was just the first step towards the beginning of a new life for them, and with excitement, they decided to plan ahead for the future. On relocating into the new house, they began to unpack all their belongings, arranging the house and putting some of their properties into each room where they felt it belonged to. They began to convert that house into a home essentially. This was a dream come true for Andrew and Lisa, and everything they had hoped for earlier from the onset. Although their daughter Heidi initially did not have friends around, she was still able to find a way to have fun. Andrew always went for work while Lisa took care of both the house and Heidi, who would most of the time go to the yard just outside their house and have fun with her toys and run around, also using the swings to keep herself playful. Over the following weeks, she began to make friends. She first met an old man living around by the name of Gordy. Now, Gordy was a kind elderly man with greyish silver hair who usually dressed on a dark suit with a tie and with shiny black shoes. Gordy was so friendly and would always come just outside their house and sit on the swings with Heidi while telling her stories. Heidi would tell her parents later that day about her new friend, and this did bother her mother because she felt it was strange that her friend wasn't a young child like herself, but rather an old man. Nevertheless, she would tell her not to talk or play with anyone she was unfamiliar with. Over the following days, Heidi would go just outside the house to play, and then Gordy would always come by and take friendly walks with Heidi. The parents would begin to keep an eye on her, and on one particular day, Andrew and Lisa saw Heidi talking to herself and seeing her raise her hands as it appears she was holding someone's hands while playing with herself. Even though this was initially unusual and disturbing for her parents, Heidi insisted that her friends were kind and friendly. Nevertheless, her parents were so happy for her and the way she had managed to make these imaginary friends for herself, even though she had no real friends and was almost alone most of the time. Weeks would go by, and every day, Heidi would continue to talk about her friend Gordy to her parents, and her mother would just play and laugh with her over it, as she thought that since Heidi had no real friends, she had just sort of make up all these imaginary friends to play with and keep herself occupied with, as she was mostly alone. As days go by, Heidi would begin to see more visitors. A few weeks later, the next door neighbor to the Wyricks family decided to sell their house property and move away. When Lisa heard of it, she told her sister, who she was very close to, about it. Her name was Joyce Kelly. After some days, Joyce would come over to look around the property. She liked it and she bought it. Few days later, she moved over with her husband. Joyce noticed that Heidi, her sister's daughter, always talked to herself. And when she did tell her sister Lisa about it, she told her, "Oh, it's just her imaginary friend Mr. Gordy she was talking with." And this kind of freaked Joyce out a little bit, but she did eventually shrug it off as just Heidi's imagination to look for someone to play with. One day, while Lisa was spending time in her house with Joyce discussing about life, the future, and with Andrew gone for work, at some point, Lisa would eventually go on to tell Joyce about Heidi's imaginary friend Mr. Gordy and Mr. Con, and how she most of the times she always spoke about them as if they were so real. At that point, Joyce would say to Lisa, "You know what, I'm going to help you find out who lived in this house before you moved in." And Lisa, on hearing that, really was happy with that idea, and she tagged her. Joyce would later go on to call the real estate agent asking for the previous owner's information. The agent would tell her that the owner's name was Mrs. Kelly, and her family have lived there since the early 1900s, and her contact was given to Joyce. Joyce contacted her, and Mrs. Kelly would later come to Joyce's house with the documents of the property, and Joyce would go through the lease of the house containing the name of the former owner before Kelly. While going through the documents, something written came to Joyce's attention. It was a name with a signature, and the name she saw that caught her attention was written James S. Gordy. She remembered the name as her sister had told her about her daughter's imaginary friend Gordy a few days ago. Joyce went on to ask Mrs. Kelly who James Gordy was, and she told her that James Gordy was a lifetime family friend and the caretaker of her mother's business who took care of the legal documents. Joyce asked her where he presently was, and Mrs. Kelly would tell Joyce something that would shake her. And what she told Joyce was that he was no more because he had died in 1974. Immediately, Joyce went to Lisa to tell her what she had heard from Mrs. Kelly. Lisa would later tell her daughter Heidi that Mr. Gordy had been dead a long time ago. But for some unknown reason, when Heidi heard of this, she asked to visit the grave to find out for herself, and immediately they reached the entrance of the gravesite. Heidi, who possibly didn't know how to read at a young age of 3, did seem to know which grave was that of Mr. Gordy, as she ran ahead towards the gravestone, and on it was written James Gordy, and confirming what Mrs. Kelly had told Joyce a few days ago. He had died in September 1974. After Joyce, Lisa's sister, had researched about the house she had moved into and known everything about it, Lisa would later decide to also research about the house in which they lived in with Kelly to know more about the house and who the other visitor Heidi had seen was, and that was Con. They researched the house and found that the house once belonged to Catherine Ledford. Immediately, they contacted Ledford, narrated their experiences, and also obtained some family pictures from Ledford. Surprisingly, she pointed out a man and identified him as the injured man who she met at the door. Kelly would look at the photo and say that the man's name was Lon and was her uncle. Now, although it sounded like Con, but it was suspected that as a little girl Heidi was, she might have mistakenly misheard the actual name Lon. Kelly also said that Lon did lost his hand in a cotton gin accident, and eventually he died from cancer in the year 1957. Hence, the man with the bandaged hand and bloody t-shirt Heidi had seen few weeks ago had been the ghost of Lon, still roaming around the neighborhood. After Andrew got to hear this information when he got back from work that evening, it disturbed him and Lisa, who didn't know how to go about this information. They discussed and finally decided to get a dog for Heidi, and the reason was to distract Heidi from Mr. Gordy, who she thought had been a real living friend all this time, only to be told he had been dead a long time ago. Heidi loved this her new dog and played with it a lot until one day, while they were at home with Andrew off to work, the dog would start staring into the hallways inside the house, growling and barking continuously at a particular direction. This continued for some days well into the nights. This unsettled the parents, as it seemed like the dog was just growling at nothing. The situation continued until one day, the dog ran away from the house and never came back. It was also never found. As time went by, the Wyricks family would begin to experience more paranormal occurrences. They would hear objects around their house move on its own, and with doors and cabinets opening and shutting on its own. One particular day, Lisa was home together with Heidi, who was playing with a real friend of hers, Bryant. At a point, one of the chairs in the living room was pulled out forcefully by an unseen force right in front of them. Immediately, The chair flipped over as if it has been thrown, and with what they had seen, they ran out of the living room immediately. And on some nights when it was time for sleep, more supernatural occurrences would be witnessed, as Lisa would hear some dark voices over her bed whispering about her, essentially talking about her just right above her head. The family had the intention to move out, but the reality of moving out of their new house would leave them financially strained, as Andrew was the only one working to provide for the family. To find a solution to this problem, Lisa decided to tell her pastor about the paranormal happenings in her home and ask her pastor what it was all about. On visiting her pastor and telling him about the situation, her pastor would try to tell her that ghosts weren't real. However, demons were very much real. This was a scary situation for Lisa and her family, and they would later go on to live with this reality with them for 4 more years. At first, these spirits were not malevolent or caused any harm, but that would change when Lisa became pregnant with their second child in 1993. This was a situation that did seem to have drawn in something more evil, dark and sinister, beginning with the consistent appearance of a manly shadowy figure with no facial features always lurking around in the hallway inside their house, and this caused total fear and panic to Heidi, who was the only one able to see this dark figure, and she would tell her parents that a bad thing happened as a dark shadow in her room. This dark shadowy figure always come to her room and would make her room colder than it was before, and on one occasion had pulled her hair. This situation even got to a climax with objects moving around the house and being thrown across the rooms, and with unexplainable sounds and voices being heard by everyone within the Wyricks household, and this also heightened to physical attacks, which most of the time at night were directed to Andrew. Now, Andrew and Lisa, who was still pregnant, decided again to just move away from these paranormal occurrences that has obviously grown violent and frequent by the day. But on a second thought, they decided that would solve their problem, as the dark entities lurking around their house would still follow them wherever they may go. In February 1944, Heidi's baby sister was born. She was named Jordan, and over the subsequent days, these attacks would intensify physically, as 2 weeks later, Heidi woke up one night and with 3 visible scratch marks on her face, followed by a body that rose rapidly in temperature. This seemed to disturb Lisa and Andrew at first, but despite the recent happenings since the last couple of years, they concluded that Heidi had unknowingly scratched herself while she slept at night. The same scratches would eventually happen to Andrew the next morning and would come with severe pain from his side abdomen, and Heidi would continue to tell her parents that it was a dark figure that had scratched them during their night sleep. Nevertheless, Andrew would wake up on more days with the visible signs of these severe scratches that came with severe pain. Heidi would continue to see other mysterious figures roaming around their house and neighborhood, and considering her strange encounter with Gordy and Lon, Andrew and Lisa became convinced that these were not just imaginary friends, but that Heidi had the ability to see spirits of dead people, and this was confirmed on September 1944 when they contacted Mr. William Roll to help investigate the supernatural occurrences occurring within their home. Mr. William was a parapsychologist. Now, to understand why they needed Mr. William's help, you should first understand what a parapsychologist does. A parapsychologist is an individual who uses science to kind of study and explain paranormal activities, psychic phenomena, and other forms of supernatural occurrences like spirits, ghosts, apparitions, and even near-death experiences. Also, Mr. William was able to dig up the photos of James Gordy, and when these photos were mixed together with other random photos and given to Heidi to identify, after going through the pictures one after another, she was immediately able to identify Gordy, who had been her supposed imaginary friend, who she had always seen within their home. And with this, Mr. William was totally convinced that indeed, Heidi could see and sense the presence of spirits, and that the family were dealing with real paranormal entities. William would ask the question which nobody could answer till this day: why are these things happening to this girl? The case got to the attention of the media and it was aired. One day, a male reporter who came to Heidi's home to get information on the happenings in their home got a dreadful feeling on stepping foot into the Wyricks property. He was so overwhelmed with this awful feeling that he had to dash into his car and peel off before he even got the chance to speak with the family. With the arrival of the media, the community got hold of the news of this family and their encounter, and this affected Heidi the most as she got a lot of unwanted attention. She was frequently booed and made fun of whenever she went to the public. Lisa and Joyce would experience more of these paranormal activities in their respective homes. On a certain day, Lisa found her daughter Jordan speaking in the hallway to someone when she was 3 years, and Jordan told her mother that she was speaking and playing with a new friend who was a fellow little girl, and Heidi would tell her mother that the little girl was friendly, but this did make Lisa uncomfortable. Few weeks later, Mr. William Rowe was called again into the home to help investigate further into the event, since not only was Heidi seeing these spirits, but Jordan, her younger sister, was now also involved. At this point, William was convinced that seeing spirits ran in the family of Lisa, as Lisa's mother and her grandparents have also had experiences of hearing the voices of these entities when they were sure that no one was around them. Mr. William helped call a psychic who would come into Wyricks' family house without being allowed to see or communicate with the Wyricks family, so that no information is leaked. This psychic had no relationship with the Wyricks family and had never heard of their situation. She also sensed a little girl and also the presence of a good spirit who she referred to as the caretaker. This caretaker was supposedly Mr. Gordy, who was Heidi's imaginary friend. She also believed that there were at least 3 dark spirits present in their home, and at this point, it confirmed what the Wyricks family had been seeing and hearing over the past couple of years. After hearing this, Andrew and Lisa called for another psychic to further confirm this, and the second psychic claimed to be able to sense spirits but could not see or talk to them. He would also tell them that there were 3 demonic entities in the home, and with one of them trying to live with Jordan in her room. The second entity was trying to attach itself onto Heidi's body, but a good spirit was fighting it off, and that good spirit was believed to be that of Mr. Gordy, while the third spirit travels between the family's living room and the walls over the parents' bed. This was the spirit that always whispers above Lisa's head while she lays in bed. Lisa and Joyce would begin to recount the multiple times during their younger years when their mother would tell them that she sees unusual people and hears a lot of strange voices, but they didn't take her serious or believed her and thought she was just being paranoid. They also thought she was just joking around with them, and now looking back, they believe that maybe this ability to sense the presence of spirits ran within the family. In a desperate need to find a solution to this problem, the family invited their church pastor over to their house to cleanse their house of evil spirits, and the pastor would pray for them and also perform the rituals associated with spiritual cleansing. Just when the family thought it wouldn't get any worse, it did got worse, as one particular night, Heidi did woke up after having some terrible feeling and sensed a dark presence at the end of her bed. Immediately, she saw this very malevolent spirit. She screamed to her parents for help. Andrew and Lisa ran immediately towards Heidi's room on hearing her screams, but before they could ask her what happened or what she saw, they saw that this supernatural entity had yanked Heidi out from her bed and picked her up by her feet and lifted her up from the ground completely while turning her upside down over the floor. And this would be the breaking point for the family and was enough to convince them to leave the house and get a new home. And just as they expected, the malicious presence continued to follow them into their new home, and the attacks and voices would eventually continue. Even right into Heidi's adulthood, her story became the focus of a Discovery Channel documentary known as A Haunting in Georgia. It also appeared on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and a book was written about it. The name of the book is The Haunting, and her story would also be the subject of various other movies. Despite her encounters with the paranormal and strange happenings around her, Heidi still went on to live a normal life and is currently married and with her own children. She would tell the media outlet that she had not seen Mr. Gordy since she was 8 years old, and while she had not seen Mr. Gordy for years, that she still frequently sees other spirits of all forms till this day, including the mysterious dark entity. However, she would say that she can sense if a spirit is an evil presence or a good presence, and she did wish these events that took place in her life never happened, because her life would have been so much different, as she wouldn't be known for being a girl that sees spirits. Ever since the media attention her life story had received, Heidi had connected with more people who shared similar paranormal experiences like her. Sadly, Andrew passed away in 2012 at the age of 45. What do you think, guys? Was this a ghost or just a demonic presence drawn to Heidi Wyrick? And if that is the case, why Heidi? Or was it just a psychic gift or ability to see and communicate with dead people and spirits? What about the poltergeist activities and violent attacks? Was this really a supernatural entity, or perhaps even Heidi's own mind just claiming some made-up supernatural power? Also, why would this paranormal activity follow the Wyricks family around wherever they moved and still remained with Heidi well into her adulthood? Why there might be no real way to know, and this spooky account of the Wyricks household continues to be talked and argued about even up until this day? I would really love to hear your opinions at the comment section below. If you had also had any sort of paranormal encounter in the past, I would also like to hear your story in the comment section below. If you love this video, please do well to subscribe, as I will be dropping daily to weekly videos and creepier to ghostly real life events that has been encountered. Also, do turn on your post notifications so that you would always be on the loop whenever I drop a new video content. And do not forget to take the like button for a fun hike within the woods of Georgia. Until next time, see ya.